I was at the Warsaw Security Conference last week. The British are proud of the fact they have a single battle group in Estonia. I actually think people don't even know what a battle group is, probably. The British Army of the Rhine had about 48 battle groups. That shows how much we've come down in terms of our military capability, and ultimately the Ukraine war is a monumental failure of deterrence.
Deaths put now at over 500, including, it's now been confirmed, a British man who was serving with the Israeli Defence Forces, Corporal Nathaniel Young. Your job working for Halo, it must be depressing, really, because the amount of work you have to do and will have to do is simply mounting all the time.
Well, I think you could call it depressing, but I would say it's vital. And my organisation was founded to deal with landmines, but we've broadened our work now to tackle conflict. And it is the question of conflict, which I would say is perhaps the most pressing problem of our age. And you mentioned it in the introduction, but we now have vast swathes of the world, all across the Sahel, North Africa, into the Middle East, down into the Horn of Africa, to Afghanistan, and of course Ukraine, which are damaged and affected by conflict. And the West is failing to find ways to tackle that challenge, and it needs to do that on a scale of the climate crisis.
Why do you think the West is failing? I mean, I suppose specifically because we're talking about the government, Westminster government. Why do you think we are failing on that front right now?
I think there are a number of answers. First of all, our own domestic preoccupations. We are increasingly only interested in our own countries, whether it be America or Britain. We're far more interested in Russell Brand or wrapped concrete than we are in what happens in Afghanistan.
But those things are important, aren't they?
Yeah, but you've got to be able to do more than one thing at once. And, you know, when, let's say, this is a Labour government hoping to come into power, the Attlee government managed to end the Second World War, form NATO, partition India, set up the welfare state, introduce the Beveridge Report, could do more than one thing at once.
Do you think it's because power has become too concentrated into the hands of potentially one person in the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and also maybe in the same model that Sir Keir Starmer has adopted too, of a almost presidential decision-making power, as opposed to a cabinet with more responsibility and more decision-making power?
Well, I certainly think that any cabinet should make use of the talent available to it. I think it's more complicated than that. I think it's an age of social media, of preoccupation with the short term and obsession with detail, and a failure to think strategically.
But it's also, is it not, that you talk about the Attlee government, Britain was at that point a world power, although one that was economically facing increasing competition. We can't really claim any longer to be a world power, can we?
I think we had the capacity to be a world power by operating through Europe. We are still a member of NATO, we still have considerable influence, and we should work with our NATO partners, notably the United States and European nations. It means that we're not a world power, but we have influence over people who are.
What we are is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, but again, that body now seems to be frozen or paralysed in terms of its effectiveness, because there isn't this consensus between the countries involved, between China and Russia in particular, and the Western powers who are permanent members.
That's right, but that was also true between 1945 and 1989. And really, the anomaly is actually the 89 to sort of 2010 period. We've got to get used to having a Security Council that can't agree and find other ways around it.
Where does what you used to do, the army, the military might come into this? I mean, would Britain be taken more seriously if it spent more on its the size of its army and its projection capabilities around the world?
I was at the Warsaw Security Conference last week. The British are proud of the fact they have a single battle group in Estonia. I actually think people don't even know what a battle group is, probably. The British Army of the Rhine had about 48 battle groups. That shows how much we've come down in terms of our military capability, and ultimately the Ukraine war is a monumental failure of deterrence.
So you feel, even although you are very much an advocate of peace, that the way to be able to establish peace is to be, frankly, much stronger than we are?
But not just with military power. I run a humanitarian organisation. Britain has cut its overseas aid. If we want to control things like migration, if we want to stabilise countries like Afghanistan, then we've got to not act on the goal line. We're like a football team with only defenders. We've got to be out there in the world, and we've got to make a difference. We need to get that with this Labour government coming in. We need to get back there dealing with problems like Afghanistan.
Can I ask you just finally on Afghanistan? I mean, there's a rescue operation underway. An earthquake has killed almost 2,000 people there. But evidently, I mean, from what you're saying, but also just the practical reality, the West really can't help very much in those areas anymore. What does that say about the state of affairs that we're currently operating under?
Well, I think it can. And I was the British commander there, but I go back to Afghanistan quite regularly. I've just come back from there, and it's a strange thing that I can go and meet the Taliban and meet them as people who are sensible and with whom I can do business. So this morning we are arranging, because we're a demining charity, we have lots of ambulances, we have lots of plant for rubble clearance, and we will go there and we will help rescue people. And that is British aid being put to good use. So actually we can do these things if we're willing to be pragmatic.
And I just want to pick you up. You say the Taliban are sensible people.
I think they're pragmatists. I think they are coherent people who think rationally. You may not agree with them. I've personally fought them. I'm no lover of them, but I believe that they are likely to remain in power, and it would be in our interests to have a conversation with them, much as other countries are, and for Britain to restore its embassy, for the United States to restore its embassy, and to
recognise the government.
I think we don't need to recognise them. I think these things can be done gradually, but we should be there, and we should be speaking truth to them and telling them where they're getting things wrong, notably over women and girls, and they are behaving appallingly towards women and girls. It's not that I want to let them off the hook, far from it. We should be there to bring them into a better place.
James Cowan, thank you very much indeed for joining us.